Yeah. So nice to see you all again. I'm sorry that I could not give my lecture last week. I had to attend the funeral of my wife's grandmother, who was 96 years old. So she was really very old. So it was a little bit a relief, to be quite honest, because she was really, well, not really fond of living. So last time we met, Nijmegen looked like a city in the snow with ice and people skating in the Ooipolder. And now Nijmegen looks like this, people sunbathing in the sun near the Waal River. I don't think that people will swim in the Waal River. Maybe there's too much pollution, but maybe people do so. So this must be really the biggest weather transition I can remember within 1 week from winter to spring. Anyway, I hope you both enjoy the ice and the sun. So the ice is, of course, it was nice to see these old Dutch images of people skating, and maybe it will take another, well, 8 years before we will be able to go skating again. Today is also our last lecture, so time really flies. And well, this was the first time I taught this course, and this is that is for staff. And today is also the first time I teach the subject that I will discuss today. That is about Dutch science and Dutch academia. So we will talk about the 13 Dutch universities with their own traditions and their own image. And then we will also do a little bit of interactive teaching today, because in breakout rooms we will talk about our own experiences in the Netherlands, and then we will discuss in class about what you have said within the breakout rooms. Then I will tell something about the university in Nijmegen, about the history, about the traditions. And last but not least, I will say something about the main scientific organizations in the Netherlands, NWO, 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 and KNAW. Both important organizations to get grants. So it's important to know what these organizations stand for. And I will also say something about a few other organizations in the Netherlands. But as a warming up, I always start with multiple choice questions that normally students will have to answer. So the first one, so this is about the art, my lecture about art. Well, I should not say it because now I already give you the right answer probably. What is the style? Is it the Dutch colonial policy after 1880? Is it the name of a specific Dutch style of football in the early 1970s? Is it the name of a VOC settlement on Ceylon or Sri Lanka, or is it the name of an early 20th century group of painters and architects? D. Now a more difficult one. Can anybody name one painter or architect that belongs to this group? So this makes it more difficult. This is an open question. Anybody? An architect or painter? Yes. It's not the proper spelling, but I I consider it to be a right answer. Mondrian, yes, Mondrian is I think the most famous one. We have also Rietveld, the architect. Rietveld is also a part of this style. The next one is also about painters, and the question here is, what is the correct chronological order Is it Averkamp, Breugel, Mondriaan, Mauve? Is it Breugel, Averkamp, Mondriaan, Mauve? Is it Breugel, Averkamp, Mauve, Mondriaan? Or Averkamp, Breugel, Van Gogh, Mauve, Mondriaan? Sorry, Van Gogh is wrong there. So is it A, B, C, D? So skip Van Gogh, that is a mistake here, but it should be Mauve. Averkamp, Breugel, Mauve, Mondriaan. Anybody? A guess? C, B, not sure. B, again B. So A, okay. D. The right answer is first Breugel, then Averkamp, then Mauve, and then Mondriaan. So it's C. So Breugel is the oldest one, at the Tower of Babel. Then we got Averkamp with these nice paintings about people skating. Then we have Mauve, which is the teacher of Van Gogh also. And then as the last, Mondriaan, who was one of the painters in the style group early 20th century. So our 13 universities, here you see a list of them on order of number of students, and also a map where you can find the location. So first, the biggest one, the University of Amsterdam. In the Netherlands, we often say UvA, the UvA. So to distinguish it from the other one from Amsterdam, the VU, the Vrije Universiteit. The second one, so the UvA is the biggest in terms of the number of students, 34,000. Then we have Utrecht and Groningen, and then Leiden and the Erasmus University in Rotterdam. Then the VU in Amsterdam, the Technical University in Delft. Delft is a small city between The Hague and Rotterdam. Then is there the Radboud University with 23,000. Then a few smaller ones, Maastricht, Tilburg, the Technical University in Eindhoven and Twente, and then in Wageningen, which is quite near Nijmegen. So what is typical of the Dutch universities? Well, first of all, they are all funded by the state. That is not completely. There's also, of course, the tuition fees, which is 2,100 euros. That's with a few exceptions. Sometimes they make an exception for some studies that are not that popular anymore, and they need people who study it. So in order to get more students, they lower than the tuition fee. I think they are now planning to do so for teachers, for example. So the state funding, so how it is exactly allocated between universities, well, it is proportional based on the number of students, but there are also other criteria, and I will not go into this whole matter also because I don't know how it exactly works, but it is relatively proportional in the Netherlands, which is typically Dutch. So all these universities need then the so-called state accreditation, and there are the infamous visitations, the visitation committees, which come to the departments for quality control, and then everybody is panicking and everybody is saying, oh Jay, now we have to get all the information they need and all the forms and all the, well, but in the Netherlands, I think important is that it is a relatively egalitarian, and it's typically Dutch, of course, university structure. So we don't have a clear Ivy League of universities. We don't have a clearly best university as you have in the United States or maybe also in England. No, it is. If somebody asks you where should I study in the Netherlands, and what's the best university, sometimes people ask this. well, that's hard to say. It's not that the difference is not that big, not so big as, for example, in the United States. Um, so Dutch universities are nowadays have quite a strong international orientation, with 15% of the students coming from abroad and 25% of the staff. About many master and bachelor courses nowadays are in English. So people publish also in English. So in that sense, English has become, you could say, the main language for many universities, making it also for, well, let's say some political parties in the Netherlands question this one-sided focus on English as a language, because, well, before you know it, you have neglected the Dutch language. And sometimes I also notice it among students that their Dutch language skills are not improving during their studies. So, well, we should really take care of this. So in the Netherlands, then, we also have a difference between what we call the general or the broad universities, which have a broad variety of different studies, with also a also academic hospital, for example, but also arts and also psychology and social sciences. And the specialized universities, such as the technical universities, it's more on engineering and things like that. An agricultural university in Wageningen, I will go deeper on this later. What's the difference between the technische and non-technische university? Yeah, so the technical university is a polytechnical university, you can call them also, are, these are universities for becoming an engineer, civil engineering, architecture, things like that. So, so then, of course, we have the famous Shanghai rankings, and there you can see how the Dutch universities perform. For what it's worth, I myself, I don't really believe in this whole Shanghai ranking. Because, well, here you see Utrecht, for example, is then the best university in the Netherlands. Well, I studied in Utrecht, history, and, well, to be honest, if I would look now at history or political science, where can you best study it? It would depend on what you want. If you would do Middle Age history, then Utrecht is a good place. But for ancient history, Nijmegen has a better image, for instance. So there you see, it's so difficult to make such a ranking. So, but nowadays, some treat science as if it's the ATP tennis ranking or something. But Utrecht scores the highest, then Groningen, Rotterdam, Leiden. There we are, Radboud, University of Amsterdam. Here you see Wageningen University, for instance, not that high, but on the other hand, Wageningen has from all universities in the Netherlands, some say the best international status, because it's really a unique university with their focus on agriculture and foresting and things like that. So there you can really study things that you cannot study anywhere else. So then we have 8 academic hospitals in the Netherlands. So many of you work, I think, at the Radboud Hospital, so maybe you know them. The AMC in Amsterdam, that is related to the UvA. Then the Erasmus, the Leiden, Maastricht, Radboud, Groningen, Utrecht, and the VU Medical Center in Amsterdam, which is then part of the VU, but they work together. But I think there was even a debate on a merger between the two. I'm not sure what the status is right now, but so these are the 8 academic hospitals. Is there a Dutch-wide national ranking? Yeah, well, that's kind of the same. Some speak about there is a student ranking, for instance. There is a ranking according to what scientists say. So students ranking, Nijmegen scores from the broad universities the best among students. Among our peers, Nijmegen scores worse than at the students' ranking. So at students' ranking, it's more Leiden and Utrecht and those universities. But also there, it's really hard to say anything about this. So let's focus then on our universities, and then first we focus on our what I call the classical universities, and then we have to start with the University of Leiden, which is the oldest one in the Netherlands. Not in the Low Countries. We even have an older university in Louvain, near Brussels, that even goes back to the 15th century. But the University of Leiden was then established by William of Orange, the father of the fatherland himself, in Leiden in 1581. And it has become a real important intellectual center in especially the 17th and 18th century. Really, students from all over, well, the world is maybe a little bit too much to say, but from all over Europe came to Leiden to study there. There you see the Academia building on the Rapenburg in Leiden. The Rapenburg, that is the canal where most old university buildings can be found. It is, you could say, nowadays the most elitist university. It is, of course, a university with also 30,000 students, but elitist, I mean that it has still a little bit this image. For instance, also the people from the Orange family always go studying in Leiden. There is a clear connection between the Dutch diplomatic service and the Leiden University. You have many student fraternities in Leiden. So, for instance, there's also a political science department. And if I ask students in Nijmegen, so why did you choose for Nijmegen and not Leiden? They say, well, Leiden has this a real bit right-wing image for them. Well, which is more an image than reality, maybe, but it still has a little bit this image. They also have now a campus in The Hague. The Hague is really near Leiden, so which is more international. Then we have Utrecht, established in 1632. Here you see the logo, the Sol Illustre, no, Sol Justitia Illustre Nos, the son of justice illuminators, and the sign of the city of Utrecht. And here is the academic building on the Dom Square, near the high tower, the high Dom Tower. It is the university with the most Nobel prizes, just after Leiden, just before Leiden. Leiden is the second one. Especially early 20th century, they had a lot of famous natural scientists. In the past, Utrecht used to be a little bit more conservative and less elitist than Leiden. So the children of more Calvinist, Orthodox Calvinist preachers went to Utrecht. And I'm talking now about the 18th century, early 19th century. It was also more conservative, for example, in the study for civil engineers who went to the Dutch Indies. So in Leiden, they had an Indology, so Indology, I have to say. That was the colonial course, the colonial study for civil servants going to the Dutch East Indies. And in Leiden, you had the so-called ethical policy, was popular there, more progressive. And Utrecht, as a reaction, then created, with money from also the Shell company, they created a more conservative Indology, where it was more about making money in the Dutch East Indies. So it was more a conservative feel. So, but nowadays, this has gone. It's more now a very big university with a main buildings at the Uithof, just outside of Utrecht and the Polder. Then we have Groningen, established in 1614, so older than Utrecht even, which has the image of being a quite liberal university. It was the university where Aletta Jacobs studied as one of the first women in the Netherlands. A lot of liberals came from the University of Groningen. Nowadays, it is of course popular among students in the northern provinces, Friesland, Groningen, Drenthe, but also from the rest of the country, because a lot of students like it as a student city. And it's a real pleasant, nice city, a little bit far away for Dutch standards, but still very nice. Then we have the fourth classical university, which is a little bit debatable if it is a classical university, because it was established in the 17th century as a Athenaeum Illustre, which was not officially a university. So the other three will say Amsterdam does not belong in our category of classical universities. It later became a municipal university in the 19th century, and because it was a municipal university, and the municipality in Amsterdam was dominated by the Social Democrats, it kind of became a Social Democrat university. And it still has this tradition of being a quite left-wing university still. Strong focus nowadays on identity studies, for example. So there are also a lot of students all around the world who are attracted by Amsterdam, of course, as this liberal city. So it has this self-enforcing dynamic here. So nowadays it has the most students. So it's the biggest university. So you could say that these 3 or 4 universities were the centers of the Netherlands in the scientific revolution, in which you could say the Netherlands was kind of a center. So the scientific revolution is the name we give to a period between, let's say, 1515. People start often with Copernicus, so, and then until 1750, the start of the Enlightenment, in which a lot of important scientific discoveries were made. And important here was that in the 16th century, we really see the impact of the Renaissance, which started in Italy. And the Renaissance, it basically was the rediscovery of old Greek and Roman knowledge. And this knowledge was rediscovered partly because of contacts with the Arabic world, where a lot of these Greek and Roman knowledge was still popular and was had evolved into newer theories. So this, you could say, Greek, Roman, Islamic science then was rediscovered in Italy, Spain also, because of the so-called Reconquista, the conquest of the south of Spain from the Moorish dominance. Important also in the 15th century was the so-called printing revolution. Before that, all the monks had to write over and over all these books, and now it was possible to print books. And of course, this was really important for the dissemination of knowledge all around Europe. Then the Reformation came, and also the discovery of new worlds, which made people questioning, well, you could say, traditional views on things. So you see in the 16th century that people began to question old wisdoms of the past, old biblical explanations. For example, there used to be this theory by this Roman medical scientist Galen. Maybe those who study or are working at the medical department know his name. This Galen had these theories about different human body fluids, and these caused different temperaments, and therefore we say cold-blooded or warm-blooded and things like that. People believe that, but nobody did empirical research and looked at how do these veins work and how does this blood work, and nobody did this. So people began to do now empirical observations. And think of this beautiful painting by Rembrandt and the anatomic lesson. So empirical observations instead of just accepting all the wisdoms of the past with people like Copernicus and Galilei and later Leibniz and Newton. And many of them, for instance, Leibniz and Newton, published their work in the Netherlands because here there was a relative freedom, relative big freedom to publish your work and to also to do experiments, because the idea of the freedom of conscience was in the Netherlands already, well, beginning to be accepted as a principle, which is of course for science really very important. Also, the Dutch focused also on science because of their sea trade and because of the need for water management. And as a result, they needed engineers. And as a result of this engineering, they needed better mathematics, better maths. And because of the need for sea trade, they had to know something about the stars, about astronomy, to make cards, cartography. So here you see how all these things led to a scientific revolution in the Netherlands. And here are a few. Wait, I have one question. Are there any international campuses of Dutch universities? Yes, Utrecht has in Middelburg the Roosevelt Academy. You could say it's an international campus. The Hague, the Hague campus is kind of an international campus. So Twente is nowadays very much international oriented. Located abroad. Oh, sorry. Yes. Yeah. Well, there's a very controversial one. I didn't say so now, but the Groningen University tried to start a campus in China, but there was a lot of problems with the freedom of science, their freedom of expression. So it is really controversial that they did this. But I don't think for the rest, there are any international campuses of Utrecht or Leiden. So a few famous Dutch scientists, and these are also name of buildings on the Nijmegen campus, a few of them, that is. And others are, maybe you will know them because there are names of Dutch science prizes or scholarships or whatever. So then you know who is behind all these beautiful scholarships and buildings. So Grotius, Hugo de Groot, was a philosopher and a lawyer who the first one who wrote books about international law and especially on the sea. Spinoza, well, we already talked about Spinoza, a very important philosopher on freedom and democracy in the 17th century. Then a engineer who also as a mathematician has a status among mathematicians is Simon Stevin. Christian Huygens, we know the Huygens building, of course. Christian Huygens, often, just after Newton, seen as the second famous natural scientist from the 17th century. Here is a few of these drawings by Huygens. It's the pendulum clock, which he discovered. Huygens was, what is also nice, I think, about these scientists then was, if you compare with now we are all hyper specialized, but these were really homo universalis. So they were both natural scientists, as they wrote about music theory, as about biology, about a range of things. So what types of support do Dutch universities get from the EU? Well, there are much scholarship. So various programs, and you can try to get one of these scholarships or funds. So there's a lot of money coming from the EU. Jan Swammerdam and Anthony van Leeuwenhoek are often named in one sentence because both of them did a lot of research on microbiology. So especially Anthony van Leeuwenhoek, who was the first one to use a microscope. And using a microscope, he discovered that inside of sperm, he saw all these, as he wrote down, these little small animals. There were little small animals swimming around in sperm of human beings. So he was the first one who could see these things, van Leeuwenhoek. And also Swammerdam, who is especially more in with insects and more a biologist. Herman Boerhaave was the head of the first academic hospital in Leiden, and a medical scientist who in his time was really very famous. There is in Leiden still a Boerhaave museum which is devoted to the history of science. Then IJzer IJzinga was an astronomer and the first one who built a planetarium. And you can see it in Franeker, a small city in Friesland, which was also the seat of a small university in the 17th century. So IJzer IJzinga was the oldest planetarium worldwide. So then we also had a lot of famous scholars who worked in the Netherlands because it was a relatively free country and because these universities, well, were of course attracted a lot of people because of their libraries. Here you see the library of the Leiden University and the number of famous scientists. So Descartes worked for more than 20 years in the Netherlands, especially in Utrecht. Locke, the British philosopher, stayed for a few years, also in the Republic. Then you have the Danish scientist Niels Stensen, or Steno, who was in the Netherlands for a few years, and also Linnaeus, also one of the buildings in Nijmegen, the Linnaeus building. Especially if you are interested in the Dutch philosophy, then I can really recommend this book by Jonathan Israel, Radical Enlightenment, in which he makes the argument that the French Enlightenment that we all know, have Voltaire, who also stayed in the Netherlands for a while, but Voltaire, Rousseau, people like that, was, you could say, prepared for in the Netherlands by people like Spinoza, Descartes, Locke, and it was a more radical version even of the Enlightenment. He calls it the radical Enlightenment. So his whole argument is basically that our modern philosophy or modern Enlightenment, well, you can find the cradle of this thinking in the Netherlands with Spinoza and Descartes. So then I go to 19th century and 20th century universities, and also Nijmegen, of course, but we have to start with then the Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam, the VU, as it is often called. A free university, it means. People sometimes think that this free has to do with some liberal or even libertarian attitude in this university, but free means something else here. Free means free of state interference. And this was because the Orthodox Calvinists wanted to have an own university in which they could teach their own evangelical Calvinist science. And especially Abraham Kuyper, and maybe you can remember his name, then established this university to create also a new elite for this Orthodox Calvinist group, which, well, in the elites in the Netherlands were all, they came from Leiden, Utrecht, Groningen, were basically liberal or secular conservative, if they came from Utrecht. But Kuyper wanted to have a real Orthodox Calvinist elite, so in order to emancipate this group. So, and therefore he decided to establish this university in Amsterdam as a free university, so free from government interference. And this meant in the beginning of free from state subsidies. And so they collected money during the church ceremonies for the free universities. And here you see a few of these old money boxes, which in which these Orthodox Calvinist people put their money for their kids to go to a college, to get a college degree. So nowadays, well, you don't see much of this Orthodox Calvinist tradition anymore, to be honest. It's now the most multicultural university in the Netherlands. So, for instance, Nijmegen is quite a white university, so you don't see many black people, people of color, Muslim people studying in Nijmegen, but most of them go to the VU, and not to the UvA, which most of them see as too left wing. But a lot of them go to the VU. Is there a campus in any of the Dutch Antilles? Yes, there is on Curaçao. There is a very small campus where you can only, I think you can only study law or something there. Then there's the Catholic University of Tilburg, which was a Catholic school of economics established in the 1930s. There was the Catholic University of Nijmegen. I will talk about this, about Nijmegen later, but there was also the need for a special Catholic school of economics. Nice thing about Tilburg, which is now called Tilburg University, just is that in the 1960s, the student revolts started in Tilburg. There was a group of students who occupied student buildings and called it the Karl Marx University. So nowadays, Tilburg University is especially focusing on economy, civil administration, laws, sociology. But for instance, you cannot study medical science. There is no academic hospital there. So about our university later. First, the specialized universities. Then we have the Erasmus Universiteit in Rotterdam, which is really a big one. In Kralingen, the quarter of Rotterdam. It started as the Rotterdam School of Economics. So they needed a school for businessmen, for traders, and especially in Rotterdam with this big harbor. So they decided to make a school of economics, which at first was not considered to be a university. It later became also the status of a university. And nowadays it's focusing on a lot of different subjects besides economy, so also sociology, medical. There's a strong medical department, so a few of the most prominent virologists, virology, so people who now study our corona crisis, come from the Erasmus University. It also has this strong tradition of econometry, which goes back to Jan Tinbergen, one of the Nobel Prize winners. Then Delft is the oldest technical university in the Netherlands, with a strong focus on civil engineering, but also on architecture. So it has a famous department of architecture. Rem Koolhaas studied there. Wageningen, I also already mentioned Wageningen, which is quite near Nijmegen. And the Nijmegen University often works together with Wageningen. But Wageningen is really world famous for its agricultural science, food refinement, also environmental studies, forestry, all these kinds of studies, and also the things like the Dutch, how do you call it, the greenhouse farming. It's typically technology that was made in Wageningen. And then Eindhoven, which is, of course, the technical university connected to the Philips multinational. So they have this tradition of computers, mechanical devices, high tech. You can call Eindhoven is a little bit our Silicon Valley. They proud themselves of being the smartest region in Europe. Well, I don't know how they have ever come to that conclusion, but Brainport Europe. So then Twente, University of Twente, that originally comes from the textile industry, which was strong in Twente, and then it evolved into a more technical university with an own campus. Then a few younger universities. First, Maastricht. Maastricht is, of course, famous because of the Treaty of Maastricht in 1992, the European Union Treaty. And therefore, Maastricht is, for people who are interested in European Union studies, a very popular place to go to. It has a very strong international orientation. There are more international students at this university than Dutch students nowadays. Then the 14th university in the Netherlands. Yes, we also have to mention this one is the Open University, which is focusing on distance learning. Well, in a way, we are all open universities nowadays. But open university, so you can just follow courses, follow different modules. Also at the open university, they send you then all your homework at your home address, and you can have sometimes meetings at a front office near your own house, because they are in different cities. Also in Nijmegen, at our campus, we have a small front office of the Open University. It's especially for older people. If you're 40, 50, or even older, 60, 60, 70, and you do it for fun or just to re-educate yourself because you need it for your job, then you can follow these modules at the Open University. We have a few private universities. The most famous one in Breukelen, between Amsterdam and Utrecht. Breukelen, which is the original name of Brooklyn in New York, but um, this private university is called Nijenrode, and it is located in this beautiful castle. It's very expensive to follow a study at Nijenrode Business University, and then we have the so-called HBO's. HBO. For instance, the Han in Nijmegen, maybe you know it. These are the Universities of Applied Sciences. And well, there's also a debate. There's always a debate: are they proper universities or not? The degree is seen, is considered as a little bit lower than a classical or another university degree. You can also go to the University of Applied Science with a so-called HAVO high school, and not you don't need a gymnasium or VWO, what you need for the university as a high school education. So it's a little bit lower, but nowadays they also do research, and you also see here, for instance, the School of Arts, School of Theater, journalism, things like that. You can study them at so-called HBO. So now I would like to do a little interactive part with all of you, and just talking about your experiences. And I would like to do so in different breakout rooms, so that you with 2, 3, 4 others discuss what are, in your opinion, the main characteristics or the defining characteristics of the Netherlands, working in the Netherlands and living in the Netherlands. About Dutch academia, what's what do you find striking about Nijmegen also? And it can just be anecdotes which you share with each other, or it's not something which has to be very analytical, or but it can also be anecdotal. So I suggest we will then make breakout rooms for 15 minutes, and then after 15 minutes we come back and we do a little discussion with the whole group about these things. Yes? So now I have to make the... Can you do this, Marieke? Make breakout rooms. Then you have to go to...
No, only the host can
Yeah.
make breakout rooms.
Yeah, I do so. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, 13 participants into, let's say, 4 breakout rooms. Yeah, and I do it automatically, so it's always a surprise which who are your roommates. So So I think, oh, sorry. Yes. So I think we're all back now. And I'm really curious what you have all discussed and what your conclusions are. So maybe is there anyone who likes to volunteer, likes to say something about the discussion in the breakout room, or anybody? So just unmute yourself then and say something, please. Who? Who wants to say something?
So Saba and I talked about how different the educational systems are in the Netherlands between what we've expected for me from the United States and from Iran, in terms of the Dutch system being very independent, where you have to learn, you're expected to learn a lot on your own.
Okay, independent, so that you study at home and not in a group or something.
Yes.
Okay. Is that an experience that others also have, that Dutch students are quite independent or expected to be independent? Now it's, of course, more than normal. Anybody else who likes to say something about the Dutch characteristics of the Netherlands, or Dutch universities, or living in the Netherlands, or an anecdote you would like to share?
Something, well, hi. So something I noticed, at least more from my field, is that this in my course in my own country, it was, although it was supposed to be like a technical course, it was still very focused on, well, there was not like really much tools or much opportunities to do applied in a way. So it was a bit more theoretical in the end. Whereas, for example, if you're in the Netherlands, there's a lot of resources to do the research and opportunities that, well, yeah, it's quite good. Yeah, there are those possibilities. I also felt that the courses were really also had a strong practical component, like that was even more important than theoretical. Yeah, that I also found quite interesting from the few courses I took here. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe that's the famous practical sense of the Dutch, more than theoretical. That is something that is often noticed by people from abroad. Yes, it's true. Others? Also about Nijmegen, maybe. Like to say something about this matter?
Well, we discussed in our breakout room about the directness of Dutch people. That some people a little at the beginning was yeah, it was a bit shocking, but then they got used to it and now they like it. And also about well, that people really are very informal in the way they talk to each other. And well, at least for me, that was a bit shocking at the beginning because I didn't know who was the professor. And it was a bit strange to talk to the professor with his first name. But now it's normal, and I think it will be weird to do it the other way around.
Yeah. Well, then you have to get used to the old hierarchy.
Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah. Well, it's also for Dutch somebody from the Netherlands who goes to another country, they also have to get used to the more formal relation. So I studied in Germany, where things are also more formal. So I also had to get used to that. So others who would like to share their thoughts or experiences on one of these matters.
Maybe I can share something about the Netherlands.
Yeah.
In our group, we discuss about what Netherlands is famous for, and in my country, in Indonesia, the Dutch is also famous for the agriculture and water management, and the Dutch government nowadays they also invest a lot in project related to water management,
Yeah.
also related to flooding and disaster management, and then the agricultural sector, because for such a one of the smallest country by region in Europe, it's amazing that you get to export become one of the biggest exporters of agricultural products.
Yeah, that's partly because of the technology from Wageningen, the Wageningen University. And with water management, it's interesting maybe. In Nijmegen, you have a huge engineer office, Haskoning, the Royal Haskoning, which sends engineers all around the world, especially for building dams and dikes and water management and things like that. Yeah, it's true. This is really a Dutch expertise. Others would like to say something about this subject. No? Then I just go on with a little bit about the our own university, the Radboud University. Well, first of all, who is this Radboud Fellow? Because the university has chosen as its name the name of a saint who is not that famous. It's not like Saint Peter or Saint Paul, or no, but Saint Radboud. So who is Radboud? He was a bishop in Utrecht in the 9th, 10th century. So even more than 1,000 years ago. He was a bishop in Utrecht. Utrecht was the main place. And why has he become the patron of our university? Well, because he was the patron of Catholic science in the Netherlands. So they all Catholic professions need a patron. That was how it worked in the Catholic pillar. So the Catholic scientists then choose Radboud, because there was the idea that Radboud then was quite an intellectual man who traveled around and was really a scholar in his times. So they had Radboud as their patron. Then there was in 1905 the establishment of the so-called Radboud Foundation. There was a group of Catholic intellectuals, scholars who really had the idea that the Catholics needed a better educated elite. A better educated elite, because they were underrepresented in all kinds of professions, lawyers, judges, diplomats, bankers, all the important professions for which you need an academic study. Catholics were underrepresented. And on the other hand, there was this typical pillarized idea. Studying in a non-Catholic environment is dangerous. It's dangerous because there you have the risk of losing your faith, and you learn all these bad things. So what better can you do than just build your own university? So 1905 they founded then this Radboud Foundation. And then in 1923, October 17th, still DS Day, was then the official opening of this Radboud University. And they did it in Nijmegen, also a nice example of the Dutch pacification democracy, because the idea was first, well, we do it in 's-Hertogenbosch, in Den Bosch, or in Tilburg, or in Maastricht. But then they chose Nijmegen because Nijmegen had partly a Protestant population then. And the idea was that Catholic students then learned to deal with Protestants. And that was important for their future because, well, as the elites of the Catholic pillar, they had to learn to cooperate with these groups. So they then had a first rector, Jos Schrijnen, who was, I think, a Jesuit. Most professors then were clergymen. So Jesuits, Dominicans, you had all these monasteries around the Catholic University where then these people went to. And the first name was al Katholieke Universiteit Nijmegen, the Catholic University of Nijmegen, the KUN, as it was often then called. And it was called the KUN until 2004, so quite a long time. Well, in the beginning, it was really a very small university, less than 1,000 students who studied 4 faculties: law, theology, philosophy, and arts. So not a medical science, not natural sciences, only these 4. And it was a very small scale, so in the sense that as a student, you just went to your professor at his home address, you were invited in his study room, and there you had your exams. So it was just a personal, it was even so that first year students visited their professor at their home addresses before the start of the year to introduce themselves. Can you imagine how this would be now? But then these numbers were so small that this was possible. There was also a student fraternity, the first one, Carolus Magnus. And here you see how these students looked like old gentlemen. Not most were men, already a few women students, but not that much. And these women students all lived together in one house near the central station. The former aula was in the Wilhelmina Singel in the city center, and there was a building here also near the Keizer Karelplein, the Emperor Charles Square. During the Second World War then, I already mentioned it, the university was then closed because the rector then refused to have the obligation for students to sign a loyalty declaration. The German occupier wanted students to sign this loyalty declaration, also to sign a declaration that they were Aryans. Well, this rector, Hermesdorf, refused this. There were also a few professors who were really in the resistance movement, and the most famous one is a man which portrait you often see in them, is Titus Brandsma, professor of theology, I think, theology, who died in Dachau, in the concentration camp of Dachau. So then after the Second World War, 1951, the St. Radboud Hospital was then established, and the medical faculty, and then late 1950s and early 60s were also the natural science department and the social sciences. And then they needed a campus, and so then there was a estate where the family Jurgens had their own estate and their own yacht castle, where if they wanted to hunt for animals and things, they went to. That was in Heyendaal, the estate Heyendaal, and there you see Heyendaal, how it looked like. So they bought this estate and built the campus over there, and in 1980, in the 1980s, all faculties definitely went to this campus. as a emancipation university for the Catholic elites, the Radboud proved to be, or the Catholic University as it was called, that proved to be a real success, only from the fact that there were 4 Catholic prime ministers in the 1960s and 70s who came from Nijmegen. De Kwaai, Marijne, Kals, and Van Acht. The later one, Dries van Acht, you see him over here. Sometimes he still lives, he's 90 years old, and sometimes you even see him walking around the campus still. And this was because there was a really strong connection between the Catholic Party, the KVP, and especially the law faculty. A lot of people studying at the law faculty came then, made career within the Catholic pillar, within the Catholic People's Party. And the Catholic People's Party was the biggest party then in the Netherlands, so could often deliver a prime minister. And as a result, there were a lot of Catholic prime ministers who came from Nijmegen in The Hague. Here you also see a picture of the old Natural Science building. Well, the only part that's left of that is what's now called the Linnaeus building. It was one of the most ugly buildings I've ever seen, to be honest, the Beta faculty in Nijmegen. Now, of course, it's replaced by this beautiful Huygens building. So Nijmegen became famous for its student revolts. And this started in the 1960s, 1970s, and was, you could say, a direct result of the strong increase of student numbers. There were in 1960, 5,000 students, and then it grew until 15,000 in 1980. So 3 times as much within 20 years. And all these students often came from working class or the middle class backgrounds as the first of their families to go to the university. And well, this was, of course, you see it everywhere in the Western world, this baby boom generation with other values, with other ideals. And in Nijmegen, this especially became very strong because student syndicalism at first became very popular. It had to do with the fact that compared with a city like Leiden, Nijmegen had not such a strong student fraternity life. So you had Carolus Magnus, but apart from Carolus Magnus, there were student, unions, as they called it. And these student unions became more and more radical. And there were ideas, especially from the so-called Frankfurter Schule, and Marcuse, and his famous one, about a critical university. That universities should stimulate democracy, should stimulate a critical analysis of capitalism. So these neo-Marxist ideas became very strong in Nijmegen. You had the so-called socialist university press in Nijmegen, the Sun, which published a lot of brochures and books, like you see over the Kritische Universiteit, the critical university. They even had their own modern spelling. And also in Nijmegen, there was quite a progressive Catholic movement, because also in the Catholic Church, you saw in the 1960s this movement at the Second Vatican Concilium towards a more progressive ideas. Also, there were people, the so-called liberation theologists, who really thought that the Catholic Catholic clergy should be on the side of the oppressed, should be on the side of the exploited, and should help them in their revolutions. So, and also other more progressive ideas. There was one progressive Catholic theologian from Nijmegen, Schillebeeks, who was quite world famous, you could say. So in Nijmegen, you saw this progressive Catholic movement coming up. Then in the student church, the Studentenkerk. When I was young, I had to go to the student church with my parents, who were a little bit in this progressive Catholic community. And it was a little bit, I can still remember, it was a little bit a hippie atmosphere then. People were dancing on bare feet and well, things like that. So it was that nothing to do with the Catholic bishops and the Pope and what we associate with Catholicism. So you see in the 1970s and 1980s also these student occupations. So the students wanted to have more democracy at the university level, but they also wanted to have another curriculum. They wanted to learn more about exploitation, about Marx, about capitalism, about gender studies also. Sometimes they even occupied buildings to have certain personnel nominated. So they, for instance, the political science department students there occupied the building because they wanted to have a Marxist teacher at their department. So wait, I have one chat. Did the Carolus Magnus fraternity collaborate with the revolt? Well, I don't really think so. Carolus Magnus from then on kind of became the more conservative part of the Nijmegen student life. Before, in the 1950s, almost all students or a lot of students became members, but in the 1960s, it were only the more conservative students who study law, for instance. Then, well, student occupations were really, almost every week there was a student occupation in the 1970s. In the 1970s and early 1980s, also the squatting movement was very popular in Nijmegen. So young people who were occupying buildings to live there, to create the counterculture, to create their own space, so to speak. And a famous squatting movement was on the Piersonstraat in the city center, and the municipal government had decided to make a parking lot there. So the squatters were very much against this idea. They had a few buildings there, they occupied them. And this really turned out into a huge riot in which even the military had to intervene. So it really, you cannot imagine it, but there were really tanks on the Oranjesingel going to the Piersonstraat. And here you see pictures of the riots in Nijmegen. It was 1981, I was a kid then, but I can still remember the tension in the city then. So also a strong women's movement in Nijmegen, feminist movement. There were bookshops for women. There were own squatting houses for women. I had an aunt then who was very active in the women's movement. So Nijmegen had really this image of being next to Amsterdam, you can say the most left-wing university. And this has its, like in Amsterdam, this had a certain self-enforcing dynamic in that left-wing students thought, well, let's not go to Leiden, let's go to Nijmegen, because there we will find kindred spirits. So since the 2000, the Nijmegen, the university then had more than 20,000 students, and nowadays also a lot of international students, about 10 till 15% of the students. And then since 2004, it changed its name into Radboud University, because the idea here was that, first of all, the Catholic university, the idea of a Catholic university more and more was seen as a problem to attract students, but also we will go into that later, because there were problems in the relationship between the university and the church. So they thought, well, let's rename it into Radboud Universiteit, and they called it Radboud Universiteit because the Radboud Medical Center had a very good image. In the Netherlands, it was also, everybody knew the Radboud Hospital. Even people from the royal family went to the Radboud Hospital because it was such a good hospital. So to profit from the good image of the hospital, they named themselves Radboud University, also to integrate, also you could say, university and medical center. Well, then our first Nobel Prizes came in 2010, one for two Russians who worked in Nijmegen for a while. Novoselov even got his PhD here. André Gein was more a visiting professor, but okay, for Nijmegen it was really a big deal because it was the first one. And well, you're not a real proper university if you don't have at least one Nobel Prize, of course. New buildings, the Huygens, the Grotius, the Eleanor Ostrom, Maria Montessori is almost about to open. And then, yeah, well, since a few months, we are no longer a Catholic university, also not officially anymore. There has been a break between the Catholic Church and the Nijmegen University, the Dutch Conference of Bishops. They came with a statement that they don't consider the Nijmegen University to be a Catholic university anymore. So the designation Catholic was then withdrawn because officially it was the Radboud University, which was then with the advisory board, which was then the Catholic Foundation or Radboud University. Something like that. That was the official name, but the designated, the label Catholic is now withdrawn. So this is after a lot of conflict, a long history of a difficult relationship between Catholic Church and university. Yeah? Already from the beginning on, Catholic bishops sometimes found certain knowledge, a certain scientific knowledge, well, a problem, dangerous knowledge about in which things that are in the Bible are debated, about the relationship between men and women, about, of course, the beginning of the world, the creation of the world, about, well, all kinds of things. Also, later on, the Catholic bishops had problems with the transgender center that was being established in the Radboud Medical Center, things like that. So a lot of conflict, and then it came now to this end. So now the university has no longer any problems with the Catholic Church anymore, you could say. Yes, a chat. Does the separation have any funding implication from the Vatican? Yes, that's a good question. Yes, well, that's difficult to say. I'm not sure how much money still came from the Vatican. I don't think that much, but that's a good question. But still, the university still has some fundings from old legacies from monasteries or Catholic churches. So, but I'm not sure about how this exactly works now. So then we go, last but not least, to a few scientific organizations in the Netherlands, which can be important for you and for your career in the Netherlands. If you want to have an academic career in the Netherlands, well, then especially NWO is a very important organization because since the 1990s, the Dutch Minister then of Education decided to give most research money not to the universities directly, but to an organization, NWO, and there researchers can apply for this money, can write proposals to get funded, and well, they have a lot of money, 1 billion a year, within different domains. And this organization is then called, we call it NWO, NWO, but mostly you will hear in the Netherlands NWO. We don't say W. With its main offices in The Hague and Utrecht, and they have the famous Veni Vidi Vici subsidies. So the funds for Veni is for PhD, for those who just finished their PhD. So this for starting scientists. Then Vidi is within 5 years after your PhD, and then Vici, or some say Vici subsidies, are then for more experienced researchers. And for the real hotshots are the so-called Spinoza prizes. These are you could say, the Nobel prizes for within Dutch science, with a lot of money for if you win them. So NWO is well, if you haven't heard of it, then you will hear of NWO probably if you have a academic career in the Netherlands. And there's also what we call KNAW, the Royal Netherlands Academy of Arts and Sciences, de Koninklijke Nederlandse Academie van Wetenschappen, KNAW. So this is already founded, this organization, in 1808 by, maybe you can remember him, Louis Napoleon, the first king of Holland, brother of the famous Napoleon Bonaparte, who founded this organization to promote science in the Netherlands and arts in the Netherlands. And it still has this task of promoting science and arts, and also has advisory functions for the Dutch government. It has a lifelong membership by co-optation, which means that you have to be asked to become a member, and that depends then on your scientific achievements. So to be honest, I'm not a member and I don't think that I will ever become one, because you really have to have a strong track record, and there are only 16 per year, I think, who are elected. But more relevant maybe is that they also have funds for researchers, and you can apply for these funds. They also have a few prizes. They have a few research institutes that they fund. So in that sense, the KNW can also, for your career in the Netherlands, be an important institution. Then we have a few other scientific organizations. Maybe you will hear their names when you do research. Oh, sorry. TNO, the Netherlands Organization for Applied Scientific Research, is a big one. The VRR, which the Scientific Council for Government Policy. And then the third one, well, maybe you've heard of this one, because nowadays it's very much in the news, in the spotlights, RIVM, that is the National Institute for Public Health and the Environment, which every day come with the numbers of people who have corona, and who come with the advices for the government, which measures to take. And so the director of RIVM, Jaap van Dissel, is nowadays, you could say, the shadow prime minister in the Netherlands. We have the Social Cultural Planning Agency, which comes with reports. The Central Planning Agency, it's more econometry. We have a few think tanks. We don't have a very rich tradition as the United States, for instance, of think tanks. We have a few of them, especially connected to political parties in the Netherlands. And then two organizations which are especially important if you have a if you're more into the organization of your department, or so it's the NVAO, the Netherlands and Flemish Accreditation Organization, who then give the accreditation to departments and universities, and the VSNU, the umbrella organization for Dutch university, the associations of universities in the Netherlands, which is in Utrecht. So I have a question. Yes. Okay. Yes. Goodbye. And I will also say goodbye to you all, because this was my last sheet, and we're now at the end of this course, and I really want to thank you all for participating. This was the first time, so this was kind of an experiment, this course for staff, and also now not physical but online, so that made it maybe a little bit less attractive, but still in these times, you know, it's nice to do something about to have these kinds of courses then. Well, don't forget to fill in the evaluation form. Marieke can maybe put it in the chat where you can find it. It is on the, yeah, there it is. So at the working at Radboud University Global Lounge website, you can find it. So please, if you like, fill in the evaluation form. Also, if you, for instance, have ideas for subjects that are not covered, or maybe that you think, well, it was a little bit too much history. Well, that's what you get if you ask a historian, of course, but maybe you think, well, it could have been a little bit more about other subjects too. So please say it in the evaluation form, and then we will have a look at it. So, and then I hope, well, we meet each other maybe sometimes at the end of the year. Maybe we can organize a borrel, some drinks somewhere if it's possible, and then we can meet in person, which I would really like. But for now, goodbye everybody, and well, and nice that you have all participated.